So this morning we're going to continue that, and I'm trying to show you that God did what He said He would do, and if He could do those huge things of making this wood step and the tree that made this thing and the technology that we have to have fans, just think of that. Won't you try to design a fan? But God gave us the ability to do these things and to think up the unimaginable. Yet He can put all these things together in our lives to solve all the problems that we have. God is good. And the overall passage for this is in the book of Colossians. There's no better. Memorize this. Even get 3 or 4 words a week because this is a good one. I want you to say this with me. So here we go. For everything was created by Him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and for Him. Now, if you believe that, then you're not going to have any issue with me. We're going to have a lot of fun today, and we're going to just look at the proofs that we can fight the world with. But if you don't believe that, you're going to be wrestling with everything I have to say, or everything that Job has to say, or everything that the book of Colossians said, or any of those issues. You're going to start wrestling with the Bible and essentially God Himself. Well, for the last 200 years, again, this isn't me saying this. This is a renowned scientist. He said that science has had a prime directive. Now, if you watch Star Trek, I'm a big Trekkie. I'm a big sci-fi guy. I like Trek. Now, I'm not a Star Wars guy. I like Star Trek. There's always one side. You're always one or the other. I know he's a Star Wars guy, and we fight all the time because of that. But we're very different. But you know, the Star Trek, the whole concept was they're not supposed to deal with developing worlds. That was the whole thing if you watch Star Trek at all. Well, what Richard Dickerson said, he's a biochemist from the National Academy of Sciences, PhD. He said, science fundamentally is a game. It's a game with one overriding and defining rule. Let us see how far and to what extent we can explain the behavior of the physical and the material universe in terms of purely physical and material causes without ever invoking the supernatural. Now, he is in the National Academy of Sciences. That's the elite of the elite. And he is being very honest here to say this is what we're trying to do. This is what science is trying to do. He goes on to say this. A chess player is perfectly capable of moving his opponent's king physically from the board and smashing it in the midst of a tournament. This would not make him the champion because the rules have not been followed. Again, I used to play a lot of chess in college. We'd play 2 and 3 minute games, just slapping that thing move, slap, slap, slap. I love chess. A great game. It's really you against the other person. It's what you know versus what they know. But I can easily at any point pull that chess king on the other side up and say, I win. But I didn't follow the rules. I didn't win. I just took his king away from the board. Again, this is what they're doing with us. They're changing the rules as they choose to do this. And as you've been seeing, and at some point I'll kind of maybe get into this a little deeper, but when something is found out and they discover something, and I think I deal with one next week. I'm wrestling with all these things so far out. But I think I'll deal with one next week that shows how they're even dealing with the Big Bang. It may never have actually happened that way. But we're still going to believe all this other stuff. Even though we've taught it for 50 years and we're going to reinvent it, it still has to be somehow true. At some point, be consistent with what you're saying and stick to something. Don't keep changing it. But because of what Dr. Dickerson said, because of this, only evidence for evolution is going to be acknowledged. Simply enough. If you deal with creation evidence, it's going to be buried, it's going to be ignored, or it's not even going to be seen by those who would even have the ability to peer review it. If you're a scientist, you have to have others to peer review your information. It's everything as a scientist. They will not allow that to happen because you're from a different paradigm, you're from a different belief system. It's been a known rule for a long time, kind of going with where we're going, that geneticists have known for 50 years or better that if there's one minor mistake in the genetic code of a species per generation, that eventually it will become extinct. Now, this is a common scientific fact among geneticists, yet they believe that cockroaches are 300 million years old. And they know that every generation, with reference to human beings, there are thousands of random mutations in DNA. I mean, everything around us changes our DNA. From the pesticides you use, to the way the food's made, to the sun changing, to the pressures, all these kind of change the way that we are. And at this point, all that does is help us to prove. Geneticists, even though they'll say these facts, they deny the concept that we can't be anything less than 3 billion years old. Yet we are having random mutations every generation. That should only put us about 100 generations out, which would be about 8,000 to 10,000 years. And yet, this is what they believe. This can be true, yet somehow we've made it with all these mutations over 3 million years. Understand they're going to do all they can to keep us from the truth. Creationists, sadly enough, there are thousands of them around the world that believe, even if they don't believe in a God, they believe in intelligent design. And you can see a lot of books out there. If you're wanting to read on this, read books on intelligent design. Because they're saying this thing is too perfectly, beautifully made for someone not to have affected it somehow. Just random chance could not have made you and you and you. It couldn't have happened. You're too beautifully and perfectly made. Well, we've been in Genesis for a while. We're moving over to the book of Job. So I want you to open up there. Job is a great, great story. If you are going through difficult times in your life, I want you to read Job. Okay? He's always the one we always throw at. But I want you to really read him. And I want you to listen to what he says because he's got so much wisdom for our time today. Again, Job, some say that Moses wrote it. Most people would say that Job himself wrote it. Or Elihu. Elihu is one of the buddies who tended to get him off track. One of his friends. We don't know. Job in the word Hebrew means persecuted one. And it's pretty much his whole story. Many people believe the book of Job to be the oldest book in the Bible. Depending on who you talk to. They'll believe it was written before Genesis was ever written. Who knows? Anywhere from 2000 BC to 500 BC. A lot of people have given it to people maybe like Nehemiah or that time period. But we don't know. The purpose is to answer a simple question. Why do the righteous suffer if God is loving and all-powerful? Have you ever asked that question? Some of you haven't, but if some of you have, you're probably just normal like the rest of us. Again, why do I go through this pain when this person who is just so evil has it so easy? That's the question we're trying to understand in Job. The focus is not really on Job's circumstances, but what he learns through his suffering. A great book, and please open it up at some point. You can read through it in 45 minutes and really understand it. Get a simple version. That way you can just enjoy the dialogue, understanding what's going on. But we're in Job 9. Turn over there, verses 8 and 9. We'll just start with a couple verses. I want you to stand with me, please, as we honor God's Word. And Job says this, He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He makes the stars, the Bear, Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the southern sky. We'll stop there. Let's pray. Dear Lord, you are mighty. And I thank you for your word, Lord. And I thank you for the trials that Job went through that I can learn, God, that you will bless me in the midst of my trials. God, you are good. Thank you for Job's concept of creation this morning. Let us understand what that looks like. We say this in your name. Amen. Please be seated. We've got about another month on this topic, and I'm not going to make it through all the sections of the Bible. But I want to show you that the Bible is very congruous with reference to the concept of creation. They believe what God said in Genesis 1 over and over and over again. We're debating this creation evolution thing, and I want to show you the different sections. When you look at the Bible, now it depends on who you talk to as to how many sections they divide it into. If you're looking at the Old Testament, we've always got things like the law, the first 5 books, the historical books, poetry and wisdom, which is where we're in today. We're in the poetry books. Next week we'll look at a wisdom book. But we're also, they would divide it into the area of the prophets. Sometimes they'll say major and minor prophets. Okay? And again, I could probably teach through every book of the Bible if you wanted to spend this, a little over a year with me on this. I could spend every book of the Bible and show you how they agree with the concept of creation. You look at the New Testament, we've got the Gospels, the history book, which will be Acts, the Pauline epistles, the general epistles. Sometimes they'll even add the Revelation to John. Depends on how they want to break it down. But those are the general sections that we can look at. We're looking at the book of poetry. Job would be considered a poetical book. And if you look at the Hebrew, it's very beautiful. It does have a little bit of rhyming, but poetry for Hebrews is not really the rhyme. It's the meter and the way that they've got chiastic structure in this thing, and it works its way out. That would be poetry for Hebrew people. But we're looking at Job. We see a man that God allows to be directly attacked by Satan. How many of you feel like you've been there before? Yeah. Woo, feel like I've been that place before. I'm Job, and call me Job my buddy. We've all been this, and this is what we see in the book of Job. He loses everything important to him, yet remains faithful to God. Have I been Job in that point? I don't know. That's one of those things God's had to keep me clear on. I don't think I've always been a Job when those difficult times come. In chapters 1 through 3, I want to give you a brief breakdown. If you don't read the book, please read it. But chapters 1 through 3, God tests Job's faithfulness by allowing Satan to attack him. Look at 1:12. The Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, you must not lay a hand on Job himself. God's still in control. But God's going to be shown big through one of his followers. What a blessing if we could be that today. What a blessing if we could be the one that gives God glory and honor through our difficulties by never turning our back on our great and mighty God. Yet sadly enough, we let the world water us down so much that I don't even know if we're ever there in the first place. If we're even on track to begin with, let alone being this one who's trying to taken off the tracks of our beautiful life, and we're put on this set of trials. Again, through Job's trials, he loses everything, including his health. His wife even tells him to curse God and die. Now, we can't beat up his wife, because his wife was going through the same things he was going through. Again, it's easy to say, oh, that woman, how'd he marry her? But we can't do that, because she lost everything as well as he did. But Job was the one who was really getting the trials. Job was the one that was being affected, but it's amazing when God works in our lives how people around us are affected also. His wife could have been the most godly, loving woman you ever saw. She was just having a hard day of it and got her words written in the book. We don't know. I mean, she could have been just the worst person ever. But I can't write her off as that because she lost her family. She lost her wealth. She lost all of her children. And if you're a woman, you know that's probably very, very close. That's a huge deal to lose everything like that, including your family that you brought into the world. Again, but Job remained strong and faithful. This is the kind of guy he was. Look at 122. Throughout all of this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. Many of us have asked the question, God, where are you? Why are you doing this to me? God, why? But we see at this point, God was trying to receive a gloriful blessing from his person Job. This is what he's trying to get. From chapters 4 to 37, Job's friends give him plenty of advice. How many of us have had those friends? I've had them. When God is literally taking me from one place to the other and it is not comfortable, it is not happy. I've had friends saying, well, what have you done wrong? Nothing. I'm living the best life I know how to live. Now, if you can see something, help me out here. But how many of us have had those kind of friends? I've heard people tell me in this church that they've had people who have been sick in their family and another family member says it's because of their sin. There's no theology for that. That's not how God works. Again, you go on. They blame these people, his friends, blame Job's sufferings on his personal sins rather than God's testing and growing of Job. Everything that God does with us is to make us stronger. If we don't go through this small thing to kind of toughen us up, if you've lifted weights or you've done anything like that, you get calluses on your hands. You know how that is. If I didn't have those calluses and I had little lily white hands and tried to do some of the weightlifting, I'd tear them up. We have to get stronger. So we go through this little thing to prepare us for the big thing that's coming. Only God knows that big thing's coming. We don't know it. We're just putting here from day to day. But God says 2 years from now, if you have not gone through this, you are not strong enough for this thing that is coming, that I know is going to come, that's going to make you even better, to prepare you for the people around him. God knows that Job has received incorrect guidance from his friends. He knows this. In chapters 38 to 42, God speaks to Job and restores him. God fittingly declares that humans do not know everything. We don't. We know very, very little. We don't. And yet we try to impose upon God every day. He humbles Job by asking a series of questions. This is what God says. Have you understood the expanse of the earth? To a mere human? No. And we've got satellites. We can kind of get the idea. We can probably get cubic feet of the earth. But to understand the expanse, the height, the depth, every nuance of the earth is what he's saying here. The same question could be asked to our best scientist, Stephen Hawking, today. Do you understand the expanse of the earth? We'd have to say no. God does. Tell me if you know all this is what God says. In the end, God then blesses Job with twice as much as he ever had before. Now again, there was probably sadness for the children that he lost, the slaves that were killed, all the family, the second and third areas of family that were lost. He would always have that to haunt him and to think about. But God blessed him much more abundantly. And 2,000 plus years later, 4,000 years later, 5,000 years later, we're able to read about his story. So the first thing I want you to know this morning, we're going to get into it now, I've given you background. God created the heavens. He did. This section brings us up to where Job is responding to his friend Bildad. Again, you got to love him. Bildad was a great old guy. He's just really way out there. But here's what he says in chapter 8, verses 4 through 6. Listen to this theology. Since your children sinned against him, he gave them over to their rebellion. But if you earnestly seek God, and if you ask the Almighty for mercy, if you are pure and upright, then he will move even now on your behalf and restore the home where your righteousness dwells. Essentially, he's saying because your kids sinned, that's why everything was taken away from you. Now again, they all attack him in different ways. Well, if it wasn't your kids, then it has to be you. What did you do? Or if it wasn't you, it had to be your family somewhere. What happened? You've lost your focus on God. You don't worship him well enough. We know how this thing goes, and I've heard it said too many times in church life, and it breaks my heart because God doesn't work this way. God does not cause you pain. Again, this is bad theology. We cause pain. Sin causes pain. The enemy causes pain. God gives us trials to make us stronger. These calluses here did not feel good when I started at 13 doing that. I went home, my hands were red and bloody and nasty because I tried to jump right into it. But now today I can lift up anything because they're thick and strong and patty. This is what it looks like, and this is what we're to do. Again, but this same question was put before Jesus. You remember book of John, chapter 9? His disciples questioned him, Rabbi, this is the disciples asking this, Rabbi, who has sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I had somebody in our own church just grieving about one of their family members who's very sick, saying another family member said it was because of their sin. The same question was put to Jesus. Jesus answered, this came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. God can be shown in a mighty way through anything that we are weak in. When we are weak, he is strong. God does not cause pain. Please remember that the next time you go through this. Job is a perfect example. Just read Job. He'll tell you about it. Don't allow that kind of theology to work into your mind because it's not there. Nowhere in the Bible does God specifically cause pain just because he wants to. He brings trials that make you stronger. Again, that's the whole thing of lifting weights, to tear your muscles down so they build up. Again, it's the only good analogy I've got, and I'll throw it out a lot. But we see that God will allow trials to ensure strength and bring blessings. This is what's happening here. Look at James 1:12. A man who endures trials is blessed, because when he passes the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. Again, count it all joy when you go through trials and tribulations. I'm there. I don't always count it joy. I'll fight with you on it. When we go through it together, we'll commiserate a little bit. We'll pray to God, please God, give me joy through this difficult situation. But that's the heart we're to have. Whether we like it or not, whether we believe we deserve this or not, it's not about what we deserve. What is God wanting to do through me at this point? And how am I going to bless him through it? So Job's sin did not bring about his downfall. His pain is bringing God's glory. Yet Job responds to this poor theology, showing the bigness of God. Getting back to verse 8 where we brought this thing together. He alone stretches out the heavens. Again, this is where Job goes. Bildad is beating the life out of him with his good friendship. And Job's saying, let's get back on track. Who is the God that I serve? Now, Job had some tough times. He had a lot of questioning of God. But he never wrestled at one point with who God truly was. He did wrestle, God, just let me go. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But he never diminished God's power or his ability. Again, this is essentially Genesis 1:1. Again, he alone stretches out the heavens. 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Job is affirming the book of Genesis. And many believe Job was written before the book of Genesis. They're saying the same things. God stretches out the heavens. The word stretches here is the word natah. Again, I love language. The language tells everything. As I've told you, and I want you to always remember, the translators are trying to give you a translation you can understand. You may not understand the true wording of it. They're trying to give you word for word. Here is one Hebrew word. Let's get what's the best English word that we could stick in that place to keep the word count the same, when the word in the Hebrew or the Greek may take a paragraph to explain. We miss all the color. We get the black and white, but we miss the color. But you look at the word nataf for stretch, it means to spread out, extend, incline, or bend. I don't hear anything about a big bang here. Boom. There it went. Let's watch it. Let's see what it does. Where's it going? Yeah, that kind of looked cool over there. Well, that's doing that thing. No, you see God stretching out and bending. It kind of looks like a potter and some clay here. How many times do we hear about that in the New Testament? We see that over and over again. There's no big bang. There's no singularity. There's no uncontrollable force here. Job understands the power of God, then that if God can stretch out the heavens, He can work in his life and cease his pain. Job understands that. Job understands also that at this point, God just chooses not to. For some reason, I must go through this. And again, he's going to ask God, why me? Just take me back to the dust. But today, he's not questioning God at all. Never is he asking a question. Again, I'm trying to show creation throughout the Bible, and I want to still offer evidences that the world's theories may be off a few degrees, or 50 or 180. Okay, it's your choice of how far you think they're off. But this next thing is really, really interesting. Talking about biological machines. Let's watch this, please.
Most people have no idea of how small and complex cells are. A typical cell from you or me, called a eukaryotic cell, is probably 1/10 of the size of the head of a pin. And yet, in that single cell, there are about 3 billion units of DNA making out the chromosomes. And those 3 billion units make the molecular machines of the cell, literally machines that make the cell work.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell. Here, the staggering complexity of its molecular machinery is clearly seen.
It's like going into an automobile factory. The factory has a large number of machines. The parts have to fit together in very specific ways to do their jobs, and if things go wrong, the cell is in big trouble. And just one cell is enormously complex, but humans, you and I, are made from trillions of cells, and those trillions of cells have to fit together in the right way and do their own job. Darwinism was a lot more plausible when we were thinking about globs of protoplasm than it is when we're thinking about molecular machines.
Each of these biochemical machines is a masterpiece of engineering and nanotechnology. They are essential to functions as vital and diverse as vision, photosynthesis, and the production of energy in the cell. Michael Behe has studied several of these machines, including the flagellum, a remarkable rotary motor.
I remember the first time I looked in a biochemistry textbook and I saw a drawing of something called a bacterial flagellum with all of its parts in all of its glory. It had a propeller and the hook region and the drive shaft and the motor. And I looked at that and I said, that's an outboard motor. That's designed. That's no chance assemblage of parts.
Behe's reaction was not surprising, especially when the bacterial flagellar motor is animated and magnified more than 50,000 times to display the details of its construction and operation.
Howard Berg at Harvard has labeled it the most efficient machine in the universe. These machines, some of them are running at 100,000 RPMs and are hardwired into a signal transduction or sensory mechanism so that it's getting feedback from the environment.
It's got some tail proteins which act as the propeller. When the flagellum rotates, these push against the water and therefore push the bacterium forward. And the motor uses a flow of acid from outside of the cell to the inside of the cell to power the turning.
The bacterial flagellum has 2 gears, forward and reverse, water-cooled, proton motive force, It has a stator, it has a rotor, it has a U-joint, it has a drive shaft, it has a propeller. It's not convenient that we give them these names. That's truly their function.
In all, about 40 different protein parts are required to build a flagellar motor. Half of them are constructor proteins, specialized mechanisms that assemble the flagellum's individual components. Since its discovery, biologists have tried to understand how a machine of such superb design could have arisen gradually, without foresight or plan, through the biological pathway Darwin envisioned.
I think what Darwin was trying to show was that things that look designed aren't really designed, but that we can find naturalistic processes to account for the complexity of life. Darwin theorized that every part of every living organism evolved through natural selection, a blind process that acts upon random changes in the cell.
That's good. We'll come back to this in a minute, kind of finish up part 2 of this. But can you imagine the complexity when it's supposed to be a simple mutation after mutation to create this thing? We'll get to this in a minute. It really gets fascinating. But God is very complex and He loves to have fun. It has taken us, if this is true, 6,000 to 8,000 years to get to the ability to even see these things, and yet He created them at the beginning. What a beautiful God we serve. Biological machines. There are too many parts that must come together for this to have happened by chance. So we see that God created the heavens. The second thing, God created the oceans. Verses 8. He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He treads on the waves. This reminds me of what happened in the book of Matthew. Remember that great story? Matthew 14:25, around 3 in the morning. That would have been a neat day to be there. I would have loved to have seen that. He came toward them walking on the sea. This is what my God can do. My God can make the sea, and my God can walk on it. Now, what are the two things about that? We see God in Genesis 1 making the ocean. We see God walking on the water later. The two things that's common is that they are God. Now, Peter was able to do it for a short few steps, but only because God was there and wanted him to. This is the kind of God that I serve that no one else can understand. That is too much beyond our ability to fathom. Genesis 1:6, then God said, let there be an expanse between the waters, separating water from water. He didn't even have to create it. He just spoke it. That's His power. That's how great He is. I want you to stand strong. I want you to walk tall. This is the God that we serve, and this is the God that will work in your lives day by day if all you do is ask Him to be there. Lord, please come into my life. Please take this off my back. I need you to be here. We know Genesis that God made the water. If God made the water, He can control it. But what's interesting here is the word tread. It's the word darak in the Hebrew. And it means to tread or to lead, conduct, overtake, or march. All of those are power words. God didn't just kind of walk out there. He is subduing it. He's like He's marching on it. He is in control. There's no weakness in any of the uses of the word darak. God's not walking. He's victoriously marching on the water. This is what God did when He made the seas. And then this is what Job sees Him doing. God's just marching and treading and just victoriously walking from one place to the other on the water. This is the God that Job served. Job knew that God would take care of him. If God can march on the water, He can solve Job's problems. If God can walk on the water, if God can march on the water, if He can create the water, I'm going to say it again, He can work in your life and solve your problems. Because we've all got them. We've all got them. Amen again. We've all got them. And we need a great God who can solve these problems. It's not a joke with me. I'm not just being pastorally saying pastor words. I need a big God because only He can solve my problems. And He has shown Himself to be big from the beginning. Again, we're continuing on the concept of evolution. Again, I want to give you a few little pieces. Have anybody ever heard of Piltdown Man? Piltdown Man. I'm seeing a few people waving their heads. Piltdown Man. In 1912, a human skull fragment was found along with an ape's jaw fragment. A tooth was found at the same place, kind of intermediate between the two. For 50 years, this was proven as the missing link, the connection from pre-humanoid to humanoid. For 50 years, for 2 generations, this was seen. It was proof of ape to man. It was. All the top paleontologists of the day were just hailing it as the greatest thing ever. Hundreds of PhDs were given out because of this thing. And scores of students were shown this as proof for 50 years, from 1912 until the 50s. 2 generations were shown this proof. It wasn't until someone outside paleontology was given permission to finally date the fragments that they were found to be of different ages. And they even found saw spots on some of the teeth, meaning that someone tried to make a tooth look like something that wasn't that really what it was. It just happened that a whole bunch of stuff died in the same spot. That's what it was. Sadly, a guy died where a pig died, where an ape happened to die. And because of that, this is what was for 50 years proven as the greatest thing ever. It was all part of a huge hoax. It was a huge hoax, but that did not deter them one little bit. All that did is when they proved that none of that was true, they started looking for the next one. Because it has to be true. All this does is prove that we've got the veracity to find what we're really looking for, because it's out there somewhere. Sadly enough, for 50 years, this started the concept of evolution. They found the proof after Darwin in the 1860s. They finally found it. And we have not gotten off that track since. No matter what comes up as a hoax, no matter how we prove it to be wrong. It was sadly enough, for generation after generation, they heard this to be true. And when you hear it to be true for long enough, no matter what, they find out that thing to be wrong, the concept, the overall philosophy is true. And this is what's happening today. Piltdown Man was a fake. And there have been plenty of others. But it doesn't, sadly enough, it doesn't stop the problem of what we now believe. So we've seen that God created the heavens. He creates the oceans. Thirdly, He created the stars. Look at verse 9. He makes the stars, the Bear, the Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the southern sky. We've also already seen in verse 8 that God stretches out the heavens. Just kind of like He's forming clay. He makes it the way He chose to make it. Job didn't see that the heavens exploded in some singularity, releasing its power. He saw that God formed it the way He chose. Again, he sees God being creative. He makes the stars. He didn't just give the stuff. Genesis 1:14, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. God puts them together so beautifully that we can even see pictures in them. Again, you ever looked out there with kids? Once in a while I've done that with the little ones, and I'm trying. Again, my little ones tend to look at it more than I do, and they'll say, oh, there's Orion, there's this guy, and okay, yeah, good stuff. I don't see it very well. But I get out there and I'll look at it with them once in a while and see the pictures up there. Again, when you look at the time this was written, there wasn't much to do when the sun went down. They didn't have books or television or the internet to be surfing. So they would do anything they could. They'd start seeing beautiful pictures put together in the sky. This is the names that we have for our constellations today came from 3,000 and 4,000 years back. Again, they were out watching flocks. What did they have to do except try to entertain themselves with the beauty of the heavens? He makes the Bear we see here, Ursa Major. He makes Orion. Again, we can see that out here. These beautiful constellations that are so clear in the New Mexico sky. The Pleiades. Amos 5:8. If you want to memorize a great verse, this is one. The one who made the Pleiades and Orion, who turns darkness into day, into dawn, and darkens day into night, who summons the waters of the sea and pours them out over the face of the earth. Yahweh is His name. They call that in seminary, they call that the signature of God. Amos 5:8. Memorize that one. Because this is who God is. Again, Amos saw the same thing that Job saw. I don't even have to go into the book of Amos now because I've already shown what he thought about God. He summons waters out of the seas and pours them over the face of the earth. He made the Pleiades and Orion. He turns darkness into dawn. This is Yahweh. This is who does this. God makes also, we see here, He makes the Bear and the Pleiades and the constellations of the southern sky. And that took me a little bit to figure out. Why didn't they label those also? They don't live in the southern hemisphere. They live in the northern hemisphere. You look at areas of like Israel, Syria, or Turkey, where most of this would have been written. This is northern hemisphere. So why are they talking about the southern sky? Again, it makes you think that they believe that to almost be a mystery because they can't see down there. But they know that God understands that mystery and He can solve it. We don't know what the stars look like, but they're mysteries to us, but they're not to God, because He put them there. There are probably other pictures down there we'll never be able to see, because our God is still creative in areas that we don't even recognize. In places we can't see, that's where God is. It's a mystery, but one that God controls. Again, if God understands this mystery and can create beauty in the night, He can work in Job's life. Now, I want to get you to part 2 of what we just looked at. It's called irreducible complexity. And I'll talk about it just 1 second after we watch this.
Irreducible complexity was coined by Mike Behe in describing these molecular machines. Basically what it says is that you have multi-component parts to any given organelle or system in a cell, all of which are necessary for function. That is, if you remove one part, you lose function of that system.
The idea of irreducible complexity can be illustrated by a familiar, non-biological machine, a mousetrap. The trap is composed of 5 basic pieces: a catch to hold the bait, a strong spring, a thin bent rod called the hammer, a holding bar to secure the hammer in place, and a platform upon which the entire system is mounted. If any one of these parts is missing or defective, the mechanism will not work. All components of this irreducibly complex system must be present simultaneously for the machine to perform its function, catching mice. Irreducible complexity also applies to biological machines, including the bacterial flagellar motor.
All told, there are about 40 different protein parts which are necessary for this machine to work. And if any of those parts are missing, then either you get a flagellum that doesn't work because it's missing the hook or it's missing the drive shaft or whatever, or it doesn't even get built within the cell.
In evolutionary terms, you have to be able to explain how you can build this system gradually when there's no function until you have all those parts in place.
But could Darwin's small, favorable variations have produced a bacterial flagellum? Some scientists doubt the possibility.
How could something new, like a bacterioflagellar motor and all the components that go with it, how could it develop out of a population of bacteria that don't have that system? When each change, according to Darwin's theory, has to provide some kind of advantage.
Imagine such a scenario early in the Earth's history. An evolving bacterium somehow develops a tail and perhaps even the pieces necessary to attach it to the cell wall. Yet without a complete motor assembly, this innovation would provide no advantage to the cell. Instead, the tail would lie immobile and useless, invisible to natural selection, which by definition can only favor changes that aid survival.
The logic of natural selection is very demanding. Unless the flagellum mechanism is completely assembled and actually works, natural selection simply cannot preserve it. It cannot be passed on to the next generation.
The important thing to realize about natural selection is it selects only for a functional advantage. In most cases, natural selection actually eliminates things that have no function or that have a function that harms the organism. So if you had a bacterium with a tail that didn't function as a flagellum, chances are natural selection would eliminate it. The only way you can select for a flagellum is if you have a flagellum that works, and that means you have to have all the pieces of the motor in place to begin with. So natural selection can't get you the bacterial flagellum. It can only work after the flagellum is there and operating.
Interesting things. Again, you look at that. And yet they debate this. This was a big one. This is a huge one. You've got biologists and atheists and PhDs. They fought irreducible complexity all over the place. They're all over that. Even Richard Dawkins, lead atheist, PhD Oxford in zoology, was all over this one. When you get something this serious, they're all going to come out of the woodwork. They're going to come out from under their rocks to try to fight it. And they did on this one. Again, it was amazing how he, just a simple guy asking a few simple questions like Michael Behe. Now, he's a PhD, very, very intelligent man. But he's simply saying this can't have happened. If one part's not there, it doesn't work. Therefore, evolution will remove it. If something grows with something that doesn't need it, eventually it will be removed. It's not going to just, okay, I'm going to keep this around until I get all the parts. That's not how evolution works. And yet they throw this at us day after day. Somehow we came from this tiny, awful little nothing protoplasm glob to where we are today through random mutations. It doesn't make any sense. Remember the woodpecker. We talked about that. All the changes that have to occur for that woodpecker to do what a woodpecker does. Other than that, the thing's just beating its head against the wall. It doesn't make any sense. So we've seen that God created the heavens, the oceans, the stars. Finally, He creates man. You need to jump over to chapter 10 with me. Verses 8 and 9. Listen to these. Your hand shaped me and you formed me. Will you now turn and destroy me? Please remember that you formed me like clay. Will you now return me to the dust? We've spoken of Genesis 1 and God making man. We didn't go into Genesis 2. Genesis 2 is like a recapitulation of day 6. Again, in Genesis 1, we say day 6, God made man, meaning man and woman, humanity. Day 2, again, you look into chapter 2, it's very, very clear on what it happened and what caused God to make man and how He did it. Again, it's the backstory of man and woman, Genesis 2. A lot of people will say, oh, that just shows the craziness of Genesis because they've got different stories. Genesis 1 tells it, and then they tell it a different way in Genesis 2. No. Genesis 2 is the backstory to day 6. It's very clear. Okay, the writer wanted to say, okay, I've explained this, but let me be even better how He made man. This is so great. Let me tell you this story. It's so much fun. Genesis 2:7, then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust from the ground and breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and the man became a living being. 2:22, then the Lord God made the rib that He had taken from man into a woman, and He brought her to the man. You see the tenderness of God, the way He's beautifully creating things. This isn't happenstance. This is not just random mutations. God is saying, this is how I choose to make my people. I'm going to put my hands and form them out of the dust. He didn't do that with anyone else or anything else. Us, man, humanity, He made us specifically with His hands. Again, everything else He just spoke into existence. When it came to us, He wanted to take beautiful, special time. He breathes life into man. He forms woman from the man. What a beautiful picture. God brings the woman to man. What a neat thing that is. How much we need each other and how much we're complemented with each other. It shows compassion. It shows tenderness of a powerful, omnipotent God. God has all these beautiful qualities. Job understands this, and he repeats it in his lament. But because God made him from the dust, maybe God can solve his problems, or at least take him home. God, if you can't get me, if you choose not to solve my problems because you can do it, I know you can. You formed me this way. You can solve my problems. If not, then just take me back to the dust and let me be with you there. Again, he understood that if this world ends, he's going to be with God because God created him. Job at this point needs a big God. He does. He's lost everything. His friends are telling him things that are lies. They're saying it's because of your sin. Job's lost his family. He's lost his home. He's lost his land. He's lost all of his wealth. And at points, I think he kind of feels that God has rejected him. All of us have been here. All of us have. If we walk with the Lord, we felt like, God, where are you? And even this morning, I've heard some of your stories of the difficulties you're going through. God, where are you now? You know, I'm praying for in the hurricane, I'm praying for that eye. I've been through 2 hurricanes. And it's amazing how beautiful and sunny it is in the eye of that hurricane. Just clear as a bell. Give it an hour and it's blowing it to 140. But right now it's beautiful. For some of you, I just want you to have that little bit of an eye. Just a little bit of a break. Job needs a big God. You and I need a big God. Do you believe in a big God this morning? Do you? I want you to be strong. I'm wanting to show you all the things. I won't be able to get to all of it. I want to show you the wealth of wisdom out there in the scientific area showing that God is out there. Piece after piece. At some point, you have to ask logical questions. Just because we write this great theory or this formula does not mean that it makes any sense. At some point, there should be some cognitive discipline so we understand this makes sense to us. It kind of has to happen that way. Do you believe in a big God? Do you believe in a God that can create the stars? Amen? Anybody? Do you believe in a God that can walk on the water? Or tread on it or march on it like a victor? What is this water? You guys can't do it, but I'm God. Watch me. Follow me and I'll get you where you need to go. This is the God that I serve. Do you believe that God carefully formed man? If God can do these things, He can work in those small problems in your life. The issue here, though, if you have trouble with Genesis, I've just added another book of the Bible you can't listen to, sadly enough. If you're saying, okay, I believe most of God's things, that Genesis stuff, I'm going to disregard that book, you're going to have to now disregard Job, because Job believes the same things. You might as well disregard Amos while you're there, because he says the same things that Job says, that is spoken in Genesis. You see the slippery slope you're on. If you have trouble with parts of the Bible, the rest of the Bible mimics all of the Bible together. They all speak the same story. They're saying the same things. All I'm going to do is make your life very hard for the next month, because I'm going to be trekking through the Bible showing if you do not believe that God did these things, you're going to have trouble with most of the Bible.